Towards the end of the 18th century, France was entering its first phase in the country's history, aiming to end the old regime of the absolutist monarchy. The 1789 revolution sparked the beginning of the end for the monarchy that had existed for centuries. Three kings who witnessed extraordinary events during that period belonged to the House of Bourbon, who had ruled France for 200 years and were all the sons of Louis Ferdinand, Dauphin of France. His sons became kings of France during one of the most significant and eventful periods in the country's history. Louis Ferdinand, Dauphin of France, was himself the son of Louis XV, who had ruled over France for 59 years. He was born on the 4th of September 1729 at the Palace of Versailles to the illustrious French king and his wife, Marie Leczinska, a Polish princess. Louis the Dauphin was twice married, firstly in 1745 to the 19-year-old Infanta Maria Theresa Rafaela of Spain, daughter of King Philip V, who died shortly after the birth of their daughter in 1746. Although profoundly affected by his loss, the 16-year-old Louis had to marry again. His father arranged a new marriage for Louis the following year to Maria Josepha of Saxony, the 15-year-old younger daughter of Frederick Augustus II, Prince-Elector of Saxony and King of Poland. Fortunately for Louis, the new match proved to be a happy one. The couple were devoted and faithful to each other and had many children together. 5 of them lived into adulthood, and his 3 sons became kings of France. As a character, Louis was totally different from that of his father, who was a serious philanderer renowned for his legendary mistresses. He was a cultured and educated man with strong ethics and religious beliefs, as a devout Catholic. Unfortunately, Louis the Dauphin died young. He was only 36 years old, and he didn't have the chance to be king. But his 3 sons ruled France during a period of huge transformation of the nation, witnessing the downfall of the monarchy and its restoration at the end of the 18th century and at the beginning of the 19th century. One can only speculate that if he hadn't died so young, he would have inherited the throne, and possibly he would have managed to rule differently and perhaps could have avoided the fall of the monarchy. His son, Louis Auguste, became Louis XVI in 1774 at the age of 19. The young king had a similar young wife named Marie Antoinette. Her father was the Holy Roman Emperor Francis I, and her mother, the Empress Maria Theresa. They had 4 children together: Marie Thérèse, born in 1778, Louis Joseph, born in 1781, who died of tuberculosis when he was 7 years old, just before the revolution started, Louis Charles, born in 1785, and Sophie Helen, born in 1786, who died in her infancy. Marie Thérèse was the couple's only child to survive the dramatic events sparked by the French Revolution of 1789. Inexperienced to deal with the financial and social problems that France was facing as a result of the previous despotic rule of his grandfather Louis XV, Louis XVI ruled over France for 18 years. He sided with the colonists in the American War of Independence, supporting their cause, but at a huge financial cost for France. That led to the king's attempt to impose radical fiscal, economic and administrative reforms that faced opposition and eventually sparked the revolution. His inability to react decisively to the social and political unrest, due partly to personal tragedies, such was the death of his son just before the revolution started, made Louis XVI and his unpopular wife, Marie Antoinette, decide to flee Paris in June 1791. Their attempt failed, and they were brought back to Paris, heavily guarded and unable to escape. The following year, the royal family was imprisoned, and a month after their incarceration, when the institution of the monarchy was abolished in September 1792, the royal family's future was looking bleak. The king was brutally executed, and his wife Marie Antoinette and their son had the same tragic end. The king's brother, the Count of Provence, and his wife fled to the Austrian Netherlands at the same time as the royal family, but unlike the king, they were actually able to escape France. Louis Stanislas Xavier was another son of Louis, Dauphin of France. He was born on the 17th of November 1755 in the Palace of Versailles and was known as Count of Provence. He was 1 year younger than his brother Louis Auguste, Duc de Berry. After the execution of his brother in January 1793, the Count of Provence declared himself regent for Louis Charles, Louis XVII, who was still detained after his parents were guillotined. When the young king died in June 1795, the Count of Provence proclaimed himself Louis XVIII whilst he was still living in exile. On the 14th of May 1771, Louis Stanislas married Princess Maria Giuseppina of Savoy at the Palace of Versailles. The Count was not very enthusiastic about the match, and the couple's marriage was an unhappy one, and it didn't produce any children. 3 years after his niece, Marie-Thérèse, was released from captivity, she was able to join her uncle in Russia. He arranged for her to marry his nephew, Louis-Antoine, Duc d'Angoulême. He was the son of Count of Artois, who was the younger brother of Marie's father, Louis XVI. Louis Stanislas spent 23 years in exile, living in Prussia, Russia, and England, according to different political alliances, and setting up his court wherever he happened to stay. Meanwhile, France became an empire under the rule of Napoleon, and it seemed that Louis Stanislas would never achieve his long-desired French crown. Yet, after Napoleon's Russian campaign, his political future was looking unstable. In March 1814, the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy was proclaimed, and Louis XVIII became King of France. In April 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate, and the king and his court returned to France and regained the royal throne. Unfortunately for Louis XVIII, his new position was short-lived. Scheming to return to power, Napoleon escaped from Elba in March 1815 and returned to Paris to regain his throne. Once again the monarchy was overthrown and the king fled to Holland. Napoleon's return was also short-lived, and after his lost battle at Waterloo, he was forced to abdicate for the last time and was exiled by the British on the remote island of St. Helena. King Louis XVIII returned to France on the 26th of June, 1815, and the monarchy was restored once again, this time as a parliamentary monarchy. The king pursued a reconciliation policy and ruled until his death on the 16th of September 1824. He was succeeded by his youngest brother, the Count of Artois, as Charles X. Charles Philip of France was the youngest son of the Dauphin Louis and was born in 1757 at the Palace of Versailles. He was also known as Count of Artois. In November 1773, Charles married Marie-Thérèse of Savoy, and the couple had two sons. In 1775, Louis-Antoine, who was created Duke of Angoulême, and in 1778, Charles Ferdinand, who was given the title of Duke of Berry. Charles Philippe was a rather handsome man who had a scandalous lifestyle, ignoring his wife and engaging in affairs with other women. He also spent a lot of money on building his own chateau, leaving his brother, King Louis XVI, to pay his debts. He was an ultra-royalist, and although he acknowledged that around 1789 France was facing financial difficulties, he did not support removing the privileges of the monarchy. In July, Charles left France at the advice of his brother when things started to deteriorate and the revolutionary sentiment became dominant. He spent his time in exile in various countries such as Italy, Germany, and eventually Great Britain, where he tried to support the cause for the dying French monarchy. After the revolution claimed the king's head, Louis XVIII arranged for Marie-Thérèse to marry his nephew, Louis-Antoine, Duc d'Angoulême. When Napoleon was forced to abdicate, in 1814, Charles was the first member of the royal family to arrive in France before Louis XVIII joined him in May to claim the throne. When Louis XVIII died in 1824, Charles Philippe became Charles X. He strongly opposed a conciliatory type of rule, and he wanted to reenact the previous monarchy, proving unpopular as a king. His absolutist monarchy traits led eventually to a new revolution in 1830 after 6 years of reigning in France. He was forced to abdicate and go into exile once more. History was repeating itself. France had acquired a taste of liberty, and the king failed to see that. He lived in Great Britain with his court, moving later to Prague, and from there to Gorizia in Italy, where he died in November 1836. Events that had started 40 years earlier, with the Revolution of 1789, ended the dominance of a famous family of the House of Bourbon, weakening eventually the support for monarchy in France.